nights. 4 shifts a week, 12 hours each, and when I'm not at the hospital, I'm usually sleeping, or trying to. That's the rhythm I've had for 11 years as a surgical technician at a regional medical center outside Columbus, Ohio. My schedule isn't a secret. It's posted on the department's shared calendar, and I've mentioned it casually 100 times to neighbors, to the guy at the corner deli, to the woman at my dry cleaner who always asks why I look so tired. My house is a 3-bedroom ranch on a quiet street in Westerville. I bought it 7 years ago after my divorce, when my kids were still teenagers and needed somewhere stable to land on weekends. They're grown now. My daughter lives in Portland with a husband and my 2 grandkids. My son is finishing his MBA in Atlanta. The house is mine alone, which means it's quiet most of the time, and the only footprints on the kitchen floor are mine. I thought I knew every inch of that place. Every creak in the hallway, every draft from the window above the bathroom sink. I thought I would notice if something was off. I was wrong. It started with a text from my neighbor across the street. He's retired, 70s, the kind of man who sits on his front porch with coffee every morning and notices things. He texted me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was finishing a 12-hour shift. "Hey, just wanted to mention, saw some people going in and out of your place yesterday. Young couple and another guy. Figured you knew, but wanted to check." I read that text 3 times standing in the scrub sink area. I had not told anyone to be at my house. I had no contractor scheduled, no repair pending, no friend with a key who I'd asked to stop by. My spare key lived in a lockbox bolted inside my garage, and the code was 4 digits I hadn't shared with anyone since I changed it 2 years ago. I texted my neighbor back. "What time?" He said, "Around noon." Said they had a cooler and some bags. Said they were there for maybe 2 hours. Said one of them drove a white Hyundai with a cracked taillight. I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage for 10 minutes after my shift ended and tried to think of a single explanation that made sense. I couldn't. When I got home that evening, I walked through the front door the same way I always do. Keys on the hook, shoes on the mat. I wasn't looking for anything specific yet. I was tired, and I told myself my neighbor might have been confused, might have seen the wrong house. He's sharp, but it was possible. Then I opened the refrigerator. There was a 6-pack of beer on the second shelf. Not a brand I drink. I drink light beer when I drink at all. And this was some craft IPA in cans I didn't recognize. Next to it was a plastic container of leftover pasta with a fork resting on top of the lid, a grocery store sticker on the container. Not a store I shop at. I stood there with the refrigerator door open for a long time. I told myself maybe my son came through Columbus without telling me, maybe he brought a friend, but my son doesn't drink IPAs, and he would have texted. He always texts. Even when he was 20 and doing things he shouldn't, he would text. I closed the refrigerator and walked through the rest of the house slowly. In the living room, my couch had been moved about 8 inches to the left. I know because the indent in the carpet was no longer underneath the legs. A throw pillow I keep on the armchair was on the couch instead. Small things. The kind of things you'd only notice if you lived alone and had nothing else to rearrange your sense of normal against. In the guest bedroom, the one my daughter uses when she visits, the bedding had been used. Not messy, actually, almost made, in the way someone does when they're trying to appear tidy, but they don't know the exact way the owner makes the bed. The pillow was on the wrong side. There was a faint impression in the mattress that wasn't there before. I stood in the doorway of that room and felt something I can only describe as a chill moving slowly up my back. Not fear exactly. Something more disorienting than fear. It's the feeling you get when the place that is supposed to be the safest place in your life, the place you pay for, the place with your photos on the walls and your dead mother's quilt folded at the foot of the bed, stops feeling like yours. I checked the bathroom my daughter uses. There was a bar of soap at the sink that I didn't buy. Pink, still in its wrapper. A toothbrush in the glass holder next to the sink. Not mine. I sat down on the edge of the bathtub. Someone had been living in my house. Not breaking in, not stealing. Living. The next morning, I called the non-emergency police line. The officer who came out was professional and thorough, but what he told me was not what I wanted to hear. There was no forced entry. Nothing was stolen. Without evidence of damage or theft, what I had was a civil matter, possibly a trespass, possibly a dispute over access, but not something with clean criminal legs. If someone had a key, he explained, and I couldn't prove they didn't have permission to be there, we were in complicated territory. He took a report. He gave me a case number. He suggested I change my locks. I asked him, what if they come back? He said to call 911 if there was an active intrusion. He said to document everything. I thanked him and watched his cruiser pull away, and then I stood in my driveway and thought about the toothbrush in my daughter's bathroom. I did change the locks that afternoon. I drove to the hardware store and bought a new deadbolt and a new knob set, and I installed them myself, which took me about 45 minutes. I also changed the code on the garage lockbox. Then I sat at my kitchen table and tried to think about who could have gotten into my house in the first place. I had given my spare key to 2 people in the past 5 years. My son had a copy. He was in Atlanta, and I'd confirmed by text that he hadn't been to Columbus recently. The other copy I had given briefly to a plumber I hired a year and a half ago when I had a slow leak under the kitchen sink. I let him in, watched him work, and took the key back before he left. Or I thought I had. That was a thread I couldn't quite pull without unraveling something uncomfortable. I let it sit for a few days. The week after I changed the locks, I worked 2 night shifts and came home to find nothing disturbed. The beer in the refrigerator was still there. I'd left it as evidence, photographed it, hadn't touched it. Everything was as I'd left it. I started to wonder if the one incident was isolated. If whoever had been there had noticed the new locks, understood the message, and moved on. Then I checked my utilities. I don't scrutinize my bills month to month. I'm on auto pay for almost everything, and I tend to just trust the amounts until something jarring shows up. But after the officer suggested I document everything, I went back through my electric and water bills going back 6 months. What I found made me feel stupid for not having noticed sooner. My electric usage had gone up significantly starting about 4 months ago. Not dramatically, not the kind of spike that would make auto pay stall out, but consistent, steady, like someone running appliances on a regular basis. My water bill had crept up similarly. On months where I worked more nights, the numbers were higher. On months where my schedule was lighter and I was home more during the day, the numbers dipped back toward normal. Someone had learned my schedule, and they had been using my house on a rotating basis for at least 4 months. I didn't panic. I'd like to say I felt cold anger instead, but honestly, what I felt was a kind of sick fascination. It was like finding out something that explained a lot of small confusions you'd filed away and forgotten. The dish I thought I'd left clean, that was somehow not quite dry when I got home. The TV remote that was on the wrong side of the couch cushion. The window in the guest bedroom I'd thought I'd left cracked, that was closed when I got back. I'd attributed all of it to my own tired memory, the fog of night shifts, the kind of minor disorientation that comes with working on the wrong side of the clock. It wasn't me. I have a coworker I've been friends with for years, the kind of man who thinks 3 steps ahead and never gets rattled. I'll call him my work friend because that's what he is, genuinely. I told him the full story in the break room one night between cases. He listened without interrupting, which is rare, and then he said, "Don't change anything else. Don't tip them off. Let them think the first lock change was just routine maintenance, and put cameras up before they come back." That was good advice. I installed 3 cameras over the following weekend. 1 covering the front door, 1 covering the back door, and 1 in the main hallway inside the house. A small indoor camera I tucked behind a row of books on the shelf in the living room. All 3 fed to an app on my phone with motion alerts. I also bought a small GPS tracker and put it under the coffee table, which my work friend said was probably overkill, but I wasn't feeling particularly measured at that point. Then I waited. The hard part of waiting is that you go to work. You do your job. You stand in operating rooms for 8 hours at a stretch, handing instruments to surgeons and watching the clock and trying not to think about your phone sitting in your locker. I slept badly. I checked the camera app every time I woke up. For 11 days there was nothing. A squirrel on the back stoop, a delivery driver dropping a package at the front door. On the 12th day, I woke up at 7 a.m. after a night shift and checked my phone and saw that the motion alert had fired at the front door at 6:52 a.m. I opened the app. There were 2 people on my front porch, a man and a woman. Both looked to be in their late 20s. The man had a duffel bag over one shoulder, and the woman was holding what looked like a cleaning caddy spray bottles, a folded cloth, the kind of basket you'd carry supplies in for a short-term rental turnover. The man reached into his jacket pocket and produced a key. A key to my new locks. I had changed those locks myself 8 days ago. The only keys were the ones I had cut, the 2 on my keyring and the one I'd put in the new lockbox. Code changed, and yet he was sliding a key into my front door like he'd done it 100 times. I called 911 from bed. Told them there were people entering my home without my authorization, and I had it on camera. The dispatcher was calm, asked for my address, told me units were on the way. She asked if I was in the house. I said no. She said stay on the line. I was already pulling clothes on. I drove toward my house and parked 2 streets over the way my work friend had coached me. Don't pull into your own driveway. Don't escalate. Let law enforcement make contact. I watched on my phone as the camera in the hallway showed the couple moving through the house. The woman went immediately to the guest bedroom and started stripping the bed. The man went to the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator. He took out the IPA cans, still there, still photographed, and moved them to the counter to make room for a bag of groceries he brought. They were not stealing. They were turning over the property, like a rental. The police arrived in 2 cruisers, which I hadn't expected. I had told myself I'd be satisfied with one. I watched on camera as the knock came at the front door and both of them froze. The woman's face, even on the small screen of my phone, went slack in a way I recognized. That specific expression that is not quite guilt and not quite surprise, but somewhere between them. The face of someone who thought they had this handled. They were both detained. I drove to my house and gave my statement to one of the officers while the other sat with the 2 on the curb. The story that came out over the following days was this. The man was a former tenant of the plumber who had worked at my house a year and a half earlier. The plumber, who I will probably never be entirely fair-minded about, had made a copy of my key before returning it to me. He hadn't used it himself, but he'd mentioned to someone, his tenant at the time, the man now sitting on my curb, that there was a house whose owner was gone 4 nights a week on a predictable schedule. The plumber claimed he hadn't meant anything by it, said it was just conversation. The man on my curb had seen an opportunity. He had been listing my house as a short-term rental on at least 2 platforms, a weekend getaway about 20 minutes from downtown Columbus. He had used real photos of my living room and guest bedroom that he had taken without my knowledge. He had described it. I later read this description in the platform's records as a cozy, updated ranch home with a quiet neighborhood feel, perfect for couples. He had collected payment through the platform systems. Over approximately 4 months, he had hosted at least 11 separate groups of guests. The total came to just over $26,000. $26,000 in my house, using my furniture, sleeping in my daughter's bed, using the soap in my daughter's bathroom. The cleaning caddy the woman was carrying that morning was because he'd hired her as a cleaner between guest stays. She was a contract worker through a local cleaning service. She said she had no idea the property wasn't his. She had been paid cash off the books. I believe her. She was released and I signed a statement supporting that. He was charged with theft by deception, identity fraud, and unlawful use of property. His girlfriend, who had been present for several of the turnovers, was charged as an accessory. Both cases eventually resulted in convictions. He received 18 months. She received probation. The platforms cooperated with the investigation fully and voluntarily, and I received a portion of the documented booking revenue through a civil settlement that took 14 months to complete. The lock question, the one I'd sat with after he turned up with a key to my new locks, was answered by the woman who told investigators that when they arrived one morning after I changed the locks and found the key didn't work, he had called a locksmith. Told the locksmith he was locked out of his own home and had lost his key. The locksmith came out, got them in, and rekeyed the front door for $120. I had not been informed because the locksmith had no reason to contact me. The new key was in his pocket 8 days later. I think about that a lot, how easy it was. A phone call, $120, and the lock I thought made me safe was irrelevant again. After everything settled, I sold the house. I know that sounds like an overreaction, and I've had that conversation with myself more than once, but I couldn't make the guest bedroom feel clean again. I couldn't stop calculating how many strangers had slept in my daughter's bed. The neighbors knew the story. The street felt smaller. I sold it in the spring and bought a second-floor condo about 10 minutes away. Something I can actually secure properly. Something with a building entrance that requires a fob and a camera in the lobby and a property manager who actually responds to emails. The condo is smaller. I don't have a garden, which I miss more than I expected, but I sleep better there. Or at least as well as someone who works night shifts ever really sleeps. My work friend says I should consider the whole thing a lesson in how much trust we extend to strangers without ever deciding to. The plumber wasn't a friend. He was a man I let into my house for 2 hours to fix a slow leak under my sink. I didn't vet him carefully. I didn't watch him closely enough. I believed that taking the key back was the end of it. It wasn't. Check your utility bills. Not just when something seems wrong, but regularly. Going back 6 months, a slow increase in water and electric is exactly the kind of thing that reads as normal noise but isn't. Check your camera app before you assume nothing happened. If you don't have cameras, get them. Not after something goes wrong, but now, because the situations that reveal why you need them are exactly the situations you can't anticipate. And if a plumber asks to hold your key overnight, say no. I know that sounds unreasonable, and maybe it is, but I'd rather be unreasonable than spend 14 months in a civil case while a stranger's attorney tries to minimize what it feels like to find someone else's toothbrush in your bathroom. I still work nights, same hospital, same schedule, same rhythm. I walk back to my building in the dark sometimes after a long shift, and I press the fob against the reader and listen for the click. And I know the door is locked behind me. That click matters more than it used to. I keep thinking about the locksmith. A stranger called, said he was locked out of his own home, and 90 minutes later, the man who had been renting my house without my knowledge had a working key to my new locks. Nobody did anything wrong in that transaction, technically. The locksmith did his job. He had no reason to question it. And that's the part that stays with me. How a chain of small, reasonable decisions can add up to something that feels deeply wrong when you finally see the whole picture. What the man on my curb did wasn't random. He didn't stumble into my house by accident. He heard something, a casual remark from a plumber about a predictable schedule and an empty house, and he made a deliberate choice to exploit it. He studied the pattern. He planned around it. He collected $26,000 over 4 months while I was standing in operating rooms at 2 in the morning, thinking my home was locked and quiet. That's not bad luck. That's a sequence of cause and effect. And at the start of that sequence was a version of me who trusted too easily and checked too rarely. I don't say that to punish myself. I say it because it's the only part of the story I actually had control over. My work friend is the one who told me not to change anything else after I'd already changed the locks. To be patient. To let the cameras do the work instead of tipping my hand. I'm not a naturally patient person. I wanted to post a note on the door. Call the platforms. Make noise. He talked me out of it. And because I listened, I had footage of 2 people using a key to enter my home, on camera. Timestamped, undeniable. That evidence is what made the criminal charges stick and what made the civil settlement possible. Patience wasn't passive. It was the most active thing I did in the whole situation. There's a version of the story where I panic, confront them without evidence, and watch the whole thing dissolve into a he said, she said, with no proof and no recourse. I came close to that version. The only reason I didn't end up there is that someone I trusted told me to think before I acted, and I had enough steadiness left to actually listen. I think about my daughter sometimes when I think about this story. She doesn't know a stranger slept in her bed, used her bathroom, left a toothbrush in her glass. I didn't tell her because I didn't want her to feel what I felt standing in that doorway. That specific violation of a space that was supposed to be safe for the people you love. I handled it so she wouldn't have to carry it. That matters to me. What I learned isn't complicated, but I had to earn it the hard way. Check the things you set to auto-pay. Look at your utility bills going back 6 months. Know who has touched your keys and trace that line further than you think you need to. And when something is wrong, don't react immediately. Gather what you need first, then move. The click of a secure door means something different to me now. So does the word trust.